This episode is sponsored by Victory Grips. Victory Grips are the standard in hand protection, plus they just launched their new gym affiliate program. As affiliate owners, they understand the demands of gym owners. Their goal is to keep their gym referral program process as simple as possible. You'll receive educational content, early access to upcoming releases, and exclusive discounts for your members, plus received a percentage of the net sales. Find out more at victorygrips.com. Welcome to the Power Monkey Podcast, where we chat with the best in the world of fitness about what they do. I'm your host, Dave Durante, with my co-host, Mike Service, and on today's episode, we have Dave Lipson. Dave has worn many hats within the fitness space, from a pro baseball player to a CrossFit Games athlete multiple times as an individual, to being on CrossFit Seminar Staff, to now competing in the bodybuilding world and having started the company Thunder Bro, which aims to bring functional hypertrophy programs to the masses, and as he puts it, aims to get athletes to lift heavy and live loud with no regrets while helping those around them be better. I met Dave close to a decade ago and always found him to be a fantastic person. So fun to be around, incredibly knowledgeable in a variety of different areas. It was great to start the conversation about hypertrophy training and what his mindset is with regards to how it can best be applied for the functional setting. I think we're really only scratched the surface with Dave, and I think we're hoping to have him back again in the near future. Hopefully we can make that happen. I also wanted to mention very quickly that this is our 200th episode. In all honesty, I can't believe that we've been doing this for almost 4 years now. We hope the content has been useful for you out there, and we're excited about what the new year holds for both Power Monkey and for the podcast. Enjoy.
How are you guys?
Good, man.
I want to know how we get a shirtless picture of Mike on that wall behind you there.
You want to join the Wall of Fame?
I can send you. Dave's wife, Sadie, is always a proponent of Fat Mike. And then I had a friend one time who was trying to convince me to do the fit to fat to fit.
Okay.
I was very resilient to that. I didn't know why I was the one selected.
These guys are all like average Joes, but I remember, if you guys can think back to the early 2000s, when there were all these like really effective fat loss drugs like Hydroxycut and Rip Fuel by Twin Lab and Muscle Tech. Well, the drugs were effective, but they would embellish things a little bit, and they would take a bodybuilder in the off season, fucking fat, and be like, blow your gut out and look, like
really bad lighting,
like obese. And then they would get them before they did their shows, and they're like 3% body fat. It's like,
works.
Yeah. But these guys here, like, we got to see these guys. I try to show all of them, or this is the backdrop. They're, just people that have come through some of our body transformation challenges over the years that have had like really awesome transformations. And I feel like I'm happy to talk about this, but like, fitness is a shit show. There's so much baloney and garbage and banter out there and semantics. And the one thing that I really think shuts people up is like the results. Like, nothing speaks louder than the results. So like, we try to just harvest these before and afters. And we're lucky we have like 1,000 of these now after years of running cool, nutrition and training transformation challenges, where we have muscle gain transformations, we have fat loss transformations. And so, come on here, get on the Wall of Fame.
Mike, got to do it.
I'll consider it for
even if
he
doesn't want to do it, we'll send you the photos.
Where are you guys all coming to us from? Where are you out of?
Global,
all over the place.
Yeah,
we've got Portland, Boston, and Hamburg.
Oh yes, all right, and Clearwater Beach, Florida.
There you go.
So we've got 3 points of the U.S. and Europe represented.
Awesome, and you guys are still going strong with the Power Monkey camps. That's so cool. Like, we actually had some people we know attended the last one. This one girl named Robin Evans. I don't know if you remember her.
Sure.
Yep.
She's a total stud. I think she's actually a former gymnast at LSU.
She did mention that she has in gymnastics. Yeah.
And
she have a good time?
Oh, she had a blast. She actually messaged me, and what we had done is we do these shred challenges like through Thunder Bro a lot of the time, but we did it through her local gym where we ran it for the gym, and she was like a stud member who had a killer transformation. So we all stayed in touch, and she's like just so awesome. She's got a great story too.
Love it.
Breast cancer survivor as well. So
yeah,
real stud.
We've been trying to get you guys out to camp for a while too. We'd love to have you out there. We're trying to
Oh, absolutely. When are you coming down to Florida anytime soon?
Now, well, the camp that we host is always at the same location in Tennessee. We have a facility there, 150-acre campus. It's a pretty sweet spot. And it's, coming on to our 11th year now at that same location. Other than that, we do travel quite a bit for our courses, our weekend one, but the camp is still in Tennessee. So if you guys are in Florida, you're not that far away.
Oh, absolutely. We would love to come. We do this hypertrophy for functional fitness workshop where we just talk about, the physiology, the methods, the mechanisms, and the practical application of hypertrophy training within the scope of, elite athletic performance. And then we also do like a little nutrition systems talk with it. But that's our favorite thing, is just getting to share this stuff with athletes and getting them to feel some of the methods. I mean, just like what you do with gymnastics, Dave, and that aha moment, it's gold.
Absolutely. And, we started to add a bunch of plate loaded machines at camp now too.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, man. So we started to add in a little muscle isolation, a little bit more of that bodybuilding work. We started to partner with Techno Gym, Italian-based company, and they make some of the best.
Techno Gym is awesome. They have. Have you seen their wall, Kinesis?
I have.
And their biometrics.
Well, if you want to spend $100,000 on a wall,
man. So if you want to come down to camp and show off some of the skills on the plate loaded stuff, we'd love to have you down there.
Oh, hell yeah. Absolutely. So cool. So what would you guys like to get into today? I mean,
the first thing is, I want to just touch on your background, because for what you're doing now is kind of like completely different than when you were an athlete yourself, coming from, I think a baseball background and then into CrossFit, and now obviously working a little bit more in the bodybuilding world. And, I just wanted to tell a quick little story. The first time that we actually met, the training grounds back in 2014 or 2015, 10 years ago or whatever it was. And, Camille was doing her thing, getting ready for the games. And I was there helping to coach. And you were there being a supportive husband and boyfriend maybe at the time. And we were hanging out and we were working out together. And I'll never forget, you gave me a nickname that's always stuck with me. And I don't know if you remember it, but you called me Tri-City Triceps.
Oh, yes. Great triceps. Yeah, great triceps.
We were doing strict weighted dips and strict weighted pull-ups. And we were doing like body weight, hanging weight, strict dips.
And because we had those really cool parallel bars there too.
Yeah.
So it was like legit. Yeah. That was so cool.
I still have the video of us working out doing it, but I was like, I love that nickname, Tri-City.
There was so much tricep going on, dude. It's like definitely the most formidable body part. Yeah, boom,
We actually just did a YouTube video on the importance of building good triceps for a lot of our push work in the gymnastics world, for good handstand push-ups and things like that, and how people neglect that muscle group so often. And, it just reminds me all the time. I was like, you know what? Even from back in the day, triceps has been important for what we're trying to do.
You have so much range of motion, like your elbows damn near hyperextend. So it's a little extra, like the lengthening and shortening of that muscle is so pronounced.
Absolutely. Yeah. And obviously in the gymnastics world, there's value, and we want to get into that a little bit that range of motion value when it comes to what you're doing versus, what I think you're working on right now and spreading some love around the functional fitness community, the idea of using hypertrophy training for functional fitness and how those two worlds can potentially merge. And so from your perspective, where do you see, just as an overview, before we get into kind of the nuance behind it, where do you see the value being in terms of working on muscle isolation, working on some hypertrophy for the competitive side of CrossFit, for the person that's going in the gym and competing in the CrossFit world?
Yeah, I mean, that's really where we start our conversation, is why, right? And just to back up, like my story, probably similar to your stories, my wife, all of our athletes, we're talking about people who are lifelong athletes. They played a sport when they were growing up, and then they found, some kind of like functional fitness or CrossFit or some kind of competitive power sport endeavor. And it really gave them a lot of joy, like being part of the CrossFit community, working hard, being intense. And then at a certain point, you'll typically start to see things that get in the way a little bit, like progress starts to slow down, injuries start to pop up. And, in terms of adaptability, your body's this really smart and sophisticated machine, but A plus B doesn't always equal C, meaning what you once were able to get a response from doesn't mean you're going to continue to get a response from. So you need to evolve things, especially as you get older, as results, are harder to come by, as, chronic overuse injuries or things start to kind of present themselves more and more. Things like exercise selection and being tactful with the training really needs to be at that next level. The same thing for nutrition. And so, for me, like when I started experiencing really bad back issues from doing high intensity competitive CrossFit, it was devastating to me, because I'm like, oh shit, if I can't deadlift as heavy as possible, or, do whatever it is, like some insane thing, like how am I supposed to train? Because we're conditioned into just thinking one way. It's like as fast as possible, as heavy as possible, only these high compound, high intensity functional movements. That's the only thing you should be doing. And at a certain point, that maybe that's not giving you the result that you need anymore. Maybe it's actually working against you. So after I had back surgery, I was sitting on a couch. Back surgery is pretty tough to go through. You're laying face up for like 2 weeks. I was sitting there just wondering, I love being an athlete so much, right? Growing up and, skateboarding, playing baseball, getting to have a pro career, being able to do CrossFit at a high level and coach CrossFit athletes and teach seminars. Like this has all meant so much to me. Now that I've been given this new life, athletically, how am I going to honor that? Am I just going to go back to doing what I was doing before and end up on a surgery table again until I just can't fucking move? Or do I want to find a way to continue to do this smarter, so that I can still get the joy out of movement? And that's the thing, right? The joy in movement, the joy in training intensely, that to me is something that I know that I need, and a lot of my athletes need, right? It's just such a valuable part of their lives. And so I started thinking, what should I do? Maybe I'll try to take up powerlifting. No, that's probably not a great idea. Olympic lifting, yeah, maybe not. And then I kind of landed on bodybuilding, thinking, the first time I ever picked up a weight in a gym, it was my high school rec weight room, and there was a rack of dumbbells in front of a mirror, and I started doing bicep curls because I wanted to get chicks and I wanted to look like a superhero, right? And I think that never goes away. That idea of the physical change, the physical adaptation, or being able to wear your work on your body, that's always been something that I really enjoyed. And if you were to ask 99% of people that ever come into a gym, why are you here? They're going to give you some derivative of, I want to look good and feel good. So, I've never really explored that at a deep level of like, what does it actually take to become a high level bodybuilder, to really dive deep into hypertrophy training? Because like a lot of people, I thought I did hypertrophy training when I started training. I'd go to New York Sports Club and do 3 sets of 10 on machines and blah, blah, blah. And it was meh. And I think the reason why it didn't provide results was exactly what I got from CrossFit, right? I didn't know how to do these really high utility functional movements. I didn't back squat or deadlift or do pull-ups or presses. I was just doing isolation machines alone. And I didn't know how to work intensely, right? Because you don't want to look goofy at the gym. So you just kind of stay comfortable, and you don't understand that adaptation process, which is really about stressing your body to the point where it has to change. And you learn that in CrossFit. So when you kind of pick up those skills and then you revisit that idea of hypertrophy, really the sky's the limit. Athletes tend to take off. So for me, it started just by researching, hey, the doctors are saying I can't lift heavy anymore with this back. And I want to know, how can I grow muscle? How can I increase my strength if I can't lift heavy? What's a way for me to, redefine intensity beyond just speed and load? And that kind of took me down a road of just researching hypertrophy methodology, the physiology, the methods, the mechanisms, the practical application. And I started reading some really well-versed PhDs in hypertrophy. One primary guy named Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, who literally wrote the book on hypertrophy. He's a New Jersey guy, and he does a lot of peer-reviewed studies. And he wrote this book, The Science of Muscle Hypertrophy. So I started reading it. I took my highlighter out. I started, picking out pieces and putting things together. And then I sent Brad a message, and I was like, hey, I'm Dave. I'm kind of from the world of CrossFit, and I love your book. I'm trying to explore ways of combining CrossFit and functional fitness with hypertrophy training. Would you ever be down for getting on a phone call? And so he did. That was amazing. I got to talk with Brad, and he's this world famous, hypertrophy scientist. And I told him what I was doing and, what my goal was and how I really want to be able to use my fitness outside the gym, but I can't continue to train like I used to. And what he kind of indicated to me was that, whether you're training with lightweight or heavyweight or low reps or high reps, it really doesn't matter from the standpoint of getting muscles to grow. What matters is that you're able to exhaust muscles close to failure in a safe way that you can do consistently over long periods of time, because that's really where the progress lies. So we together kind of talked about stuff. I went back home and I wrote our first book, the 90-Day Get Huge program, which was the program I was using to get out of, after back surgery, my weight had dipped down almost 30 pounds. And I was like, I want to put on some mass. And what this program was it was very simple. It was 8 sets of 8 reps with 3-second negatives. So lots of time under tension, only 40% of your 1 rep max on the bar. So pretty lightweight, and truncated rest periods that were a little short. And what this was doing was leveraging a lot of mechanisms associated with muscle growth, like time under tension and metabolic stress, without having to go to that top end loading. And I was just shocked how well it worked. I was like, holy crap, this is crazy. I'm front squatting and my legs are shaking like a leaf, but there's no weight on the bar. Like, what's going on here? And that's the thing about really good hypertrophy training, is it's not about making heavy weights feel easy. It's not about using speed and momentum, because that actually takes a lot of tension off the muscle, but it's about making light weights feel hard and finding really cool ways to challenge muscles or create intensification methods to really be able to create that exhaustion that will drive the growth. And then from there are 10,000 other layers with nutrition and understanding your internal chemistry and the lifestyle and the recovery process and training splits and macro cycles. I mean, there's tons of stuff to kind of uncover, but that was really my starting point. And at that time, I was still working full-time for CrossFit, teaching seminars. And I was getting really excited about this stuff. And I started coming up with these ideas of doing hypertrophy finishers. For instance, if we did the workout like Fran, right, where we're doing thrusters and pull-ups, maybe we pick an associated body part like the biceps or the lats or even overhead pressing. And we do a 10-minute hypertrophy finisher after the workout to get a little extra hypertrophy training on that body part without going as heavy as possible, without going as fast as possible, but really just leveraging some of these methods. And I wrote a book, the Hypertrophy Finishers Bible. And, at this point, I've written like 12 books on hypertrophy and how you can blend it with CrossFit. And it was at a trainer summit where Dave Castro and Nicole Carroll approached Camille and I about doing a course. And they were interested in having us, take over like the competitors course, which at the time I think might have been struggling a little bit. And he goes, would you guys be interested in doing a course? I said, absolutely. I got this great idea. I'm exploring all the ways that you can combine hypertrophy training with CrossFit and use it. And I was coming up with all these arguments as to why it fits in best. And these arguments were things like, number one, the orthopedic safety, right? If speed and load are the primary causal mechanisms that lead to injury, we can remove those elements and still get a lot of intensity by using things like tempos and drop sets and supersets and overload eccentrics and cluster sets and shocker sets and all these really cool things that are going to help your muscles grow and actually fortify those common areas of breakdown. So if you're someone like me with a bad back, you can do a lot of hypertrophy training for the postural spinal muscles and be able to express that intensity, but it doesn't always have to be intensity. Or maybe it's an argument for athletic performance, because from a performance standpoint, and I think this is where you guys might be most interested. Once you get athletes who are beyond the honeymoon period of CrossFit, right? So when you start doing overhead squats for the first time or practicing, cool compound gymnastic movements, just due to the fact that these are high-powered functional movements that you haven't done before, you see great adaptation. But, shortly thereafter, after maybe 2, maybe 3 years, you see that level of stagnation. And I think what's happening is that for a lot of athletes, if we look at like the the model of the 10 general physical skills that we use to describe fitness. And these skills are like possible adaptations you could have associated with high levels of fitness, cardiorespiratory endurance, stamina, strength, flexibility, power, speed, coordination, accuracy, agility, and balance. For these adaptations, the top ones they call biological, meaning there's change in the tissue, right? So you can see increased mitochondrial density, increased muscle length, increased muscle fiber size. And for the bottom four, they're primary neurological, right? So they're going to be how well the brain communicates with the body. And the middle two, power and speed, are influenced by both. Well, what I think is happening is that athletes start to tap out those neurological adaptations after a few years, where, for lack of a better word, they already know how to cheat, right? They already know how to use their hips to get themselves over the bar. They already have the positions and the patterns of the Olympic lifts. And while they need to practice, probably the biggest area or room to grow is not in the software, in the wiring between the brain and the body, but in the hardware and increasing the actual physical size or contractile potential of the muscle, because they're so good at understanding how to use their body. Now, if we increase the cross-sectional size and strength of that muscle, now they have the ability to express a lot more power. If you were to compare the amount of improvement they could get by practicing a little bit more versus the amount of improvement they could get by putting on 10 more pounds of muscle, it's not even comparable, because, like I said, these guys already have those systems in place. So that would be the argument for performance. And then the final one, which for me is the selling point now, and all these guys right here, most people are going to the gym because they want to look good naked. They want to wear their work on their body. They want to see those improvements happening in the mirror. It's encouraging. I know that if you're going to devote all this time and effort and money into fitness and health, you want to be able to wear that work on your body and walk into a room and have people look at you and go, wow, that person must train. So to me, that is honestly one of the biggest arguments for hypertrophy training in CrossFit is, if you have a population of people that are there because they want to look good and feel good, then you should be able to deliver a program that provides that. Because if they're feeling banged up or they're no longer, making progress and they don't love the way they look, something's got to change, right? It can't just be this blanket, okay, constantly varied functional movements executed at high intensity, go. But maybe now it needs to evolve into something a bit more tactful, right? A bit more thought out, especially once you get beyond that period of just adapting to the general program, or beyond that honeymoon period, or as you get older and things are not happening as well or as easy as they did when you were younger. The precision and accuracy with training and diet becomes increasingly more important. And from an injury standpoint, movement selection becomes vitally important.
So thank you, Dave. That was quite a breakdown there. There's a lot to go through. We can dive into so many questions, but there's one in particular that kind of jumps out at me and had to do with this performance portion of the conversation, especially with the demographic that normally are listeners of the podcast, CrossFit athletes. You talked about, the first few years as a learning curve that's fairly steep, right? They're learning the movements, they figure things out. It's a lot of new PRs and, high-fiving going on, and then you kind of reach a plateau. And you mentioned that as an opportunity for, hypertrophy to kind of assist in their continuing to find gains. However, I just want to push back a little bit from our side of the technical piece of it, and where we see a lot of the problems coming in is people are learning those things and maybe they're making incredible gains over those first few years, but they're learning things from a technically imperfect perspective, meaning maybe they don't have the mobility to learn a snatch technically sound. Or maybe they're getting their first muscle up in an open workout because they have 10 people screaming at them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're moving efficiently through that range of motion. So they get their first 10 reps in an open workout and then they can't do it a year from then. They can't figure out why. The question is with regards to how much time would you emphasize in this type of training, incorporating hypertrophy with skill building, on building range of motion? Because range of motion for us is critical, being able to what we call create shapes. If you can't access that range of motion, it's going to limit your ability to create shapes for skill development. And I know with a lot of bodybuilding, there's maybe shortened reps that are going on. There's a lot less of, resting on skeletal structure, which is important in the gymnastics and skill building world. I'm curious from your perspective, how much emphasis you put on skill building around range of motion and mobility, and then on top of that, building your hypertrophy training.
Well, you're totally right. Like you need to have the skills, right? You need to have the positions and the patterns, because we see it all the time. I remember back at the level 1, every once in a while, we'd get a bodybuilder who would come into the level 1 and be like this big, meaty, 250-pound guy. And somehow there's a girl next to him who's doing more pull-ups, and a guy who weighs half as much as he does that's deadlifting, the same amount of weight. So what gives? Well, that person's a display model only, and that's the extreme expression. The same way the 155-pound guy with the 400-pound deadlift but looks like an average Joe is the opposite of that expression, right? He's got the neurological, he lacks the physical. So I think it really, the context of that depends on the athlete, right? If you're talking about like let's say the best athlete in your gym, right? The guy who's like going for the regionals or the semifinals or whatever it is, typically that person already has decent positioning, right? There aren't huge gaps or dysfunctions in their range of motion. In terms of what you're talking about, like functional range of motion, absolutely. Like that is a big part, and what I would consider almost a healing process for people. New range of motion is weak range of motion. Injury creates range of motion restrictions. So how do you work around that? It's the same thing you do when you're coming off of surgery and therapy. You're doing slow and controlled reps with progressive tension and tempos, and you're incrementally increasing or progressively overloading the capacity of that range. Guess what? That's hypertrophy training, right? So hypertrophy training is really an extension of therapy, and where a lot of training may be like breaking down joints. Like you're saying, if you don't have the positions, or if you're going too heavy and you're just grinding through stuff, you're likely creating damage across tendons, across ligaments, and even maybe some osteoporosis level damage. But when you actually take time to build up and fortify those critical areas of breakdown for a CrossFitter, that would be shoulders, that would be back, that would be hips, that would be knees. Then now when you do go put your foot to the floor or go pedal to the metal, now you've got the musculature and the structure to back up that intensity. And then furthermore, when you have something like a lagging muscle group, right? So let's say, for instance, when you do a deadlift, your hips shoot up from the ground, and then you do like a back extension, right? Because maybe you lack strength in your posterior chain. Just by doing some targeted hypertrophy work on muscle groups that are lagging, and if you're wondering which muscle groups are lagging on you, take a look in the mirror. That's a great way to see where is the development and where is not the development. A quad dominant athlete is going to have bigger quads and smaller hamstrings, right? And vice versa. So you can target these lagging muscle groups or common areas of breakdown, or areas that are potential hot spots for you. For instance, my lower back would be a hot spot for me, or my shoulder with like some rotator cuff tears that I've accumulated over the years is a spot that maybe we target a little extra hypertrophy on from a muscle building standpoint. Now, how much of that should you do? Well, that depends on two questions. What do you want, and how fast do you want it? Right? So if you're someone who's like, yeah, I want to keep doing CrossFit and just make some small improvements and see if I can get this body part up a little bit, well, you could probably just throw in some targeted hypertrophy work a few times a week on that body part and be fine. If you're someone who's like, yeah, I'd like to gain a little bit of muscle mass, but still continue to compete, and I got these things, so I can't go full tilt into hypertrophy training, maybe that looks like a 3-day or a 4-day-a-week hypertrophy template. But if you're someone who's like, hey, I want to become a new athlete, I want people to look at me next year and not be able to recognize me, I want to go from 165 pounds to 195 pounds because I'm a good cardio dude. I can do gymnastics all day, but I always get schooled on the strength stuff. That would be a full tilt, go in deep with hypertrophy, mass gainer protocol to get more physical size on you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, from our perspective, and I'll let Mike jump in here. We try to train and our athletes, and the way that we work at camp and at our seminars is for longevity. We want people to be able to do these things for the rest of their lives. And, aesthetics and those things are a portion of it, but we want people to be able to move really well. And so we put such an emphasis on good mobility trainings, a lot of body weights, understanding what your body's capable of doing before you start doing external load. And so from my perspective, in terms of combining these two worlds of, building strength and getting big versus keeping mobility, is that possible to maintain both at the same time? And where do you put the value on the mobility side of that to be able to balance those things? So
yeah, and I think there's probably a tipping point, although I'm always shocked at how mobile bodybuilders are. If you go to the Olympia and you see these guys getting into deep splits, doing a front double bicep, you're like, wow, what gives? There's a couple different mechanisms that we use for hypertrophy training. And what I love about our approach is, a lot of traditional hypertrophy training is just linear periodization, 8 to 12 reps of just as heavy as you can with certain kinds of tempos and concentration work and things like that. But there are a couple different mechanisms that we like to use. The first is muscle tension. And this would be considered some of the heavier mechanical loading stuff, right? So if the bar ain't bending, you're just pretending. Yes, you should be able to touch some heavy weight, but it doesn't need to be like that every single exercise or even every single day. So that's one primary mechanism. The other one, which is probably more applicable to what you're talking about, is termed concentration work. And what concentration work does is it pins a muscle down, it takes it through an extreme range of motion under submaximal load and a lot of control. So an example of that would be something like a preacher curl, right? Where you're going to go to the very end range of the bicep with the most tension at the bottom and then come back up. And this is going to be a little bit kind of mid-range level work, 10, 12, 15, sometimes even 20 reps, but super duper slow and all the way to exhaustion or to failure. This can also be seen with like lower body movements, right? So if you're doing something like a Bulgarian split squat with your front foot elevated into a deep lunge, this again would be like concentration level kind of work where you're going nice and super slow and just living in those positions. The cool thing about hypertrophy is there's so many ways to achieve it, like I mentioned, but one way that's very underutilized that I really like is just loaded stretching. Loaded stretching creates a hypertrophic effect. So if you're staying in the bottom of a squat or doing some pauses or isometrics through different positions, that's a great way to build positional strength and capacity. And then the final way, which I think is one of the mechanisms we tend to use with athletes who are kind of, maybe they have restrictions or, different elements where they just can't lift heavy, is metabolic stress. And what metabolic stress is, it's the buildup of hydrogen and lactate in the muscle that causes an acute level of swelling in and around the muscle fiber that is able to pack a hypertrophic effect. The protein enzymatic responses from getting a pump, if you kind of like are doing something that's light rep and high reps, for instance, if I say, hey, Dave, we're going to finish out today with 200 banded hammer curls and 200 tricep press downs with your enormous triceps, then you're going to get, the muscle's going to get very full. And it's that cellular swelling that can have an effect. And what's neat about that is that's how you get hypertrophy out of really light weights, is by using truncated rest periods, very high repetition ranges, and just getting a lot of volume of contraction in there. So it really just depends on who you're dealing with. I like creating programs that have all those elements in play because I don't know what you're going to respond best to. So I'd love to expose you to everything. And then from there, you start to kind of figure out what works best for you.
That was going to be one of our other questions, but I'll let Mike jump in here right now. I know he's been writing up some notes down there. So I know he's got something he wants to jump in with.
Yeah, I'm like 30 minutes of like absorbing and then like wanting to ask so many questions or marry some ideas. Oh man, like I guess the one thing I want to start with is one, Dave, I think you speak our love language like 100%. So you said like living in positions. So, one thing from myself coming from a weightlifting background and then kind of marrying my concepts to the gymnastics world with Dave and, the core of Power Monkey is this idea of body shapes and understanding positions. And then, ironically enough, I married a former bodybuilder. So then, connecting that to mind muscle connection and understanding hypertrophy training and, why you're doing something the way you're doing it. So I want to come in with a question for you and maybe you already answered it and maybe you can elaborate more on it. But if you're developing like a hierarchy of needs for somebody coming in, and I know you said it, it depends on the person and you're going to ask the why, but when you look at something like mobility, let's say skill acquisition, and then hypertrophy, how do you marry those three things together when you're coming up with a program?
So I honestly think regardless of the athletic endeavor, hypertrophy is the foundation because you need muscle to perform any activity. If you're an endurance athlete, you need hypertrophy. If you're an Olympic weightlifter, you need hypertrophy. If you're a CrossFitter, you need hypertrophy. It's the foundation of everything. And beyond that, in terms of what you're talking about, it's also the currency of longevity. Right? It's like you want to accumulate as much muscle mass as you can, as early as you can, and maintain it as long as you can, because after a certain age, it's going to start to deteriorate. And people with muscle tend to do better, right? What do you call an athlete under 200 pounds? A victim.
Don't hurt our feelings here, Dave. Come on, we got two guys here.
I'm just fucking around with you guys. But I think what's nice about it in terms of what you guys are talking about is it does start with movement. It has to start with movement, right? And so let's say you get grandma who is nowhere near being able to do a squat down to the full range of motion. Well, obviously, we're not going to start with a 1 rep max back squat, but we're going to start with hypertrophy-based training and begin by restoring healthy functional range of motion at a submaximal load, preferably with good control and preferably in a way that allows us to progress because we're taking the muscle to exhaustion progressively. And then once she can get to the full range of motion, then we can start increasing some load and actually bringing her up, on that continuum. But I think it all starts with hypertrophy. And beyond that, there has to be movement. Can you get hypertrophy with body weight movement? Absolutely. I mean, check out Dave. He can do 9 million dips. That's a great. I think that gymnastics, honestly, is one of the most underutilized hypertrophy tools people do because they're so quick to skip to the sexy stuff. How many athletes that you know can sit there and do 100 good-looking push-ups in a row? Probably not a lot, right? But somehow they're already moving on to muscle ups and squat snatches and all this other stuff because it's those basic functional calisthenics, I think, that really is the foundation. If you're, let's say you're a dad or a coach coaching young kids out there, you don't have to rush kids to get to the barbell. Have them master the body weight movements. And if you want to make it harder, slow them down. And if you want to make it harder, have them, you can do squats with someone until they fall over. I mean, it's not really that hard. One of the things I love when we do our hypertrophy seminars is taking these athletes that think they're pretty strong and think that, they're maybe beyond this stuff and having them get absolutely schooled doing a banded pull-up. Right? I mean, these people like, I got 50 unbroken pull-ups, but you can't do 10 with the band. Like there's a gap there, right? So, living in those simple foundations, I think, is a great place for a lot of athletes, honestly, to go back to. And for the athletes that are banged up, that are bummed out, that they can't do muscle ups or they can't do squat snatches or whatever it might be because their shoulder or their back or their hip or their knee, they can still get a lot of intensity. And I believe that that's the therapy for getting them back to that, is going back to those foundations and having a remarkable level of capacity doing the simple things uncommonly well, right? Isn't that the premise of virtuosity, doing the common uncommonly well? And so now if we look at it through the lens of muscle building, now you're like, well, maybe I shouldn't have skipped away from that. Maybe I can go back to doing some banded pull-ups. So we'll do these nasty complexes where, people will do hypertrophy pull-up negatives. And I know you probably like this, Dave, from a gymnastics background. Boy, oh boy, people are shocked how hard it is to a wide grip pull-up negative for 8 sets of 8. And these are like pretty damn good athletes in the CrossFit space. So it's really just opening their eyes to new ways of creating intensity beyond just the ultimate expression of high, power output.
Dave, I want to highlight one thing that you're talking about that maybe some listeners are hearing, and I think Dave and I definitely value a lot, and we preach nonstop, which is this idea of tempo and eccentrics. So you've mentioned it a few times, and like personally, it's something that was a total game changer for me as an athlete, as a weightlifter, but then as a coach. So it has so many values to me, and then I'm curious to hear a little bit of your perspective on that. But with weightlifting specific, adding tempo, adding time under tension, it accomplishes two things for me. One, it does offer a hypertrophy moment for people. So, my favorite thing to do with somebody is actually a 10-second tempo down and 10-second pause back squat. Like somebody will, tell me, my back squat is blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, cool. Let's test it today. Like, let's do a 10 second.
Lots of good, I got some great tricks for you guys. I'll try to
like,
share. I'll have to pull
let's
out
do
my book here.
let's do a 10-second eccentric, 10-second pause back squat, and then see what you get there. And then we can base some training off of that. And the reason I like this is one, I know that it just has a lot of, physiological and neurological benefit. But then on the psychological side, for an athlete, especially in CrossFit functional fitness, we spend so much time trying to move fast because everything is testing. Like, how fast can I do this? How fast can I do this? How much can I do this? If we slow it down, just on the mental side of things, you start to build a lot of awareness. And that awareness allows for the skill acquisition, and then it allows for the muscle connection, and then it allows for the hypertrophy. So there's so much benefit to it. And then I guess I just want to hear from you a little bit how you incorporate that into what you do.
Dude, I'm telling you, if you guys are going to pull a soundbite from this podcast, here it is. One of the best things, I think we're able to do with athletes is take the focus off of the whiteboard, where it's just about the score. How fast could you go from A to B? How fast could you do the Fran? How heavy could you lift? It's a shift from the result to the training effect. The focus is not on how heavy. The focus is on taking your muscles to complete fatigue and exhaustion. If you've done that, if it's with a 45-pound bar or 400 pounds, it doesn't matter. Bodybuilders don't care how much weight they're lifting. They care that their muscles are growing. And so that's such a nice mental break from people, because they always succumb to their egos and a lot of that hurt they feel of like, oh, I'm declining. I'm not as strong. I'm not as fast as I used to be. It's because they're so focused on that. They don't even see the path to getting there, because that's always going to be pulling them away from that. So mentally, that's a great break. You mentioned stuff about doing eccentrics, and the cool thing about eccentrics is that it leverages a mechanism in the body called muscle micro tearing. Muscle micro tearing are large tears in the outer membrane sheath of the muscle fiber, the sarcolemma. This is a membrane that allows vital nutrients into the cell and toxins out of the cell. But when you accumulate these large tears, which are most effectively done by lengthening a muscle under load or doing slow and controlled eccentrics, what happens is those tears, they heal and they remodel and they grow back thicker and stronger. And then beyond that, within the internal components of the muscle fiber, you have these myofilaments, which are strands of myosin and actin proteins that actually connect to each other and pull against each other. So they create a cross bridge, and then they pull the Z lines closer to each other when they're contracting, all in this beautiful, like, synchronous symphony of tens of thousands of motor units at the same time. Well, when you are lengthening and holding that contraction, holding those bonds against the load, you're starting to damage those myosin and actin bonds, and even those bonds will heal and grow back thicker and stronger. So hypertrophy allows you greater contractile ability, because you're strengthening those contractile components when you create the muscle micro tearing and the damage. Where it sometimes becomes tricky is how much damage is too much damage, and are you allowing yourself the time between training sessions to allow that damage to heal? Because if you're doing things constantly varied, that doesn't mean that muscle group is going to recover. And so this is where I think training splits become really important. And there are lots of different training splits, right? You have 5-day splits like legs, chest, back, shoulders, and arms, Monday through Friday. You have 4-day training splits, upper, lower, upper, lower. A lot of power lifters like that one. But the idea is you need to find the training split that allows you to, let's say, crush your legs on a leg day and hit it hard to the point where you're doing something you've never done before and your legs are shaking and it's absolutely terrible. And then you're sore for 1 to 2 more days. That's delayed onset muscle soreness. That is actually an analog to the damage that you've created in the muscle with muscle micro tearing. And then by the time the next leg day comes around, you should feel fresh and hungry enough that not only are you not sore, but you want to train those legs hard again, right? And so a lot of our athletes that have had like chronic hip, knee, shoulder issues, they're able to actually make progress because it's a week between leg days. That doesn't mean they're not touching their legs on other days, but they're certainly not doing it from the standpoint of heavy loading or really breaking down muscle. It might be in the realm of like conditioning or a leg flush or something like that. And that alone, that recovery time is really where the magic happens. And I know that the eccentrics are really popular, but we can't distill it down to just eccentrics or lengthening, because the concentric phase of the movement where the muscle is shortening is much harder to control than the eccentric phase. So if you want to take things to the next level, what you can do is you can put in eccentric tempos, but also concentric tempos. And the beautiful thing about a concentric tempo is that it eliminates momentum, right? Mm-hmm. Momentum is the enemy of hypertrophy. When you're moving fast, right, the weight becomes lighter. The tension on the muscle isn't as strong. When you're moving slow, there is continuous and harder tension. And then beyond that, if you look at the profile of the muscle, there's mechanical advantages. As the muscle shortens, you get a greater advantage. As it lengthens, you get a lesser and lesser advantage. So you can introduce things like dynamic resistance with bands or chains, or overload eccentrics with athletes pressing down the bar and helping athletes up with a forced rep to really... What you're doing is you're trying to trick mechanosensors in the muscle, these really intelligent muscles that have things like Golgi tendon organelles that are going to communicate with your brain to tell you how heavy, what's the range of motion. And if you expose yourself to loading that you are unaccustomed to, that alone will skyrocket you immediately. And I think that's honestly the easiest way to see that is like when you take an athlete and you say, okay, do some pull-up negatives. That's the fastest way. Do some handstand push-up negatives. That's the fastest way to give somebody capacity to do handstand push-ups, just by exposing them. And they don't have to do more or anything. It's just a matter of giving them something different. And you can include it, you can introduce that different component with loading. So different types of loading, different ranges of motion. So for instance, on the deadlift, okay, my deadlift isn't going up. You can only deadlift as much as you can deadlift. But if you go to a rack pull, now you're bringing the muscle to a more advantageous range of motion, where maybe now you can go from that 400-pound deadlift and touch 500 pounds. And neurologically, you're learning how to move 500 pounds. And those neurological adaptations that take place, they're also creating neuroendocrine responses, meaning your body is going to secrete all these really cool anabolic hormones like testosterone and growth hormone. So that neuroendocrine response in relation to challenging mechanosensors and touching weight that you've never touched before, or movements you've never touched before, or range of motions you've never touched before, that's really phenomenal for getting athletes to progress. I hope that was a short enough answer.
Well, that was Dave Durante. This is, I'm asking a question that's going to take you to where hopefully you want to go with it, just from what Thunder Bro is telling us here. So you were talking about kind of building or promoting, let's say, these new neural pathways. So like somebody that's never felt 500 pounds, if they can't pull it from the floor, but then all of a sudden they pull it from a rack, like, yeah, the brain just realized like, oh my God, I can pull 500 pounds.
That's like, probably more tension than your lats or erectors or
they've never felt
have ever felt before.
Exactly. Yeah. And one thing, and this is where Dave Durante, I want to connect the dot to you, because we don't necessarily get this option in weightlifting, is the value of spotting. And this is something that we do a lot in gymnastics with Power Monkey, is spotting. And so many athletes, I think, are resistant to be spotted. And so many coaches are afraid to spot because they don't know how. But what we teach, and Dave, then I'll let you go into it much more, is when you get spotted, you learn how to do the movement. So all of a sudden your brain opens up to the idea of like, oh, that's what it feels like to go through that range of motion. That's what that is. And it opens up an opportunity to acquire a skill that maybe you didn't realize you had. And Dave, that's Durante. Yeah. That's just what I was thinking about there.
It's the same thing in terms of neurologic pathway being accessed, right? A rack allows it to be done with a load that you're not able to do, free weight. A spotter, two spotters, allows you to create a neurologic pathway around a movement pattern that you just can't access on your own. That's why spotting is such a huge tool in the gymnastics world in terms of creating movement patterns, creating the ability of an athlete to take maybe the strength component out of the equation as they build that separately on hypertrophy type of training method. But the spotter is there in the same way to help them, access that neurologic pathway. So you're exactly right, Mike. There is a connection there to a gymnastics side of spotting. It's something that we've created a course on recently to give coaches and owners, even other members, more confidence around saying, I know where to stand to create a safe environment for my athletes so that they feel more confident in the exercise they're trying to do. But it's something I think we need to start establishing more within the community. Come back to you, Dave, some of the things you touched on there that I want to just get a little bit more elaboration on. Um, the the first part is there's a huge athlete ownership component, I think, to what you're talking about here, because for the everyday athlete that's going to maybe follow one of your programs, there's a lot of science, there's a lot of nuance that goes into this that, somebody just goes into the gym, just tell me what to do and I'm going to do it. But
it's
there's
really hard to write these programs too, because when we do stuff, it's not the typical 5x5 back squat. It's, the first set may be a blood flow set, and then the next set might be mixed tempos, and then the next set might be different ranges of motion and partials, and then the next set might be a drop set, right? So it takes a lot of, because I'm not physically there with the athlete, we have to do a lot of writing in detail. And I think that's honestly the biggest difference when you're like reading a traditional bodybuilding program versus one like ours that uses varied methods and intensification methodologies. Like, you really need to understand what it is you're going for. And like, just to kind of go back to what you were talking about, Dave, on the skill acquisition, really great bodybuilders, they all have training partners, and they have training partners for a reason. They have training partners there to give them forced reps. A forced rep is when you fail and then you get one more, right? Or you hit a couple of partials. And, one way you can do this is, like, let's say if you were doing handstand push-ups, you're going to have the eccentric capacity to lengthen the muscle before you have the concentric capacity to shorten it. So that might look like an overload eccentric, where the athlete is lowering themselves on their own, and then you give them a little bit of help on the way up, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a great way to kind of build up that capacity. And I'm sorry, I didn't.
No.
The rest of your question, though, I just wanted
not
to.
Not at all. I'm glad you brought it back. I'm glad you brought it back. I think it brings up another important point. I've brought it up on the podcast in the past, but I love this story because I think it just accentuates that point. When I got to college, I walked into the gym at Stanford my first day, and I blew my knee out, ACL, MCL, meniscus. My first turn, I flew in from Jersey, and I ruined my whole freshman year. Ruined in terms of not being able to compete. But my coach gave me two things. He said, okay, you're going to get strong. We're going to spend time on your upper body, and we're going to fix your shitty handstand. And at the time, I thought my handstand was good, and we're going to spend time on positional awareness. But what he did was he gave me a strength partner. And that was something that every athlete, when you move into the gym your first day, you get a strength partner. And that becomes your buddy that you create forced reps with around positional awareness around your gymnastics movements. So when you're learning an iron cross, you don't just hold at your lowest position as long as you can, and then hopefully it inches down inch by inch. You go down to full positions and even below, but you have someone creating that forced position with as much spot as necessary for you to feel the position, and then they ease up that tension over time. So the same exact thing happens in the gymnastics world when we're building positions. They're just more complex in terms of the neurological component than it is what you're doing. But what you're talking about in the bodybuilding world is exactly what happens in the gymnastics world as well.
Yeah. And, what's cool in bodybuilding is, like, typically, you have access to all these sexy machines where you're pretty safe because you're locked in. All you need to do is master what seat height you want it to be and how hard you want the bar to be. Mm-hmm. Adapting this stuff to barbells and dumbbells and free weights and gymnastics, honestly, has been the biggest task for me to take on, is figuring out how does this relate to an athlete who's training in their garage with a barbell. And there's so much stuff that is honestly old school bodybuilding methodology that is so crazy effective, like manual resistance. And it can be manual resistance against body weight. It could be manual resistance against the weight as well. But these are like incredible ways to really challenge muscles in a fashion that they're just not used to. Like, what it's like to move the straight bar. But if I put my hand on top of it and now I'm controlling the speed, all of a sudden it's like game over. You're going to be completely lit up. And I think that's where, if you're a gym owner or, you got a training partner in your garage, you can absolutely incorporate stuff like this where, you're getting some manual resistance on top of calisthenic movements or even on top of some weighted movements.
Do you encourage that at all in your training, saying, hey, your plan would be benefited if you have a training partner? Like, they're going to be able to access training tools that you can't do if you're just on your own.
For any of my athletes that are intermediate to advanced, I say you need to have a training partner, because when you're first getting exposed to this stuff, just like CrossFit, like you're going to adapt just by doing it because you haven't done it before. But then it gets to the point where you need to squeak out a little bit more progressively, right? You need to get that next forced rep. You need to have that safety net there because you want to get the, 3 more pounds on the bar. The bumpers are going to be the control, right? So like the bumper lanes in terms of injury are always going to be the tempo and the positions that you're dictating. Because when we say failure, we're not talking about I can't move the bar. Failure means I can't move the bar correctly. That's when you get to failure. So we want, I tell athletes, as the movement becomes more challenging, the reps need to be getting prettier and prettier because those are going to be the most valuable repetitions. And then, like having an athlete there, it allows you to do some of these really cool things that we're kind of talking about. But even beyond that, like thinking outside the box a little bit, and we haven't talked about this, isometrics are incredible. Alone isometrics are incomplete, but when you combine isometrics with loaded movement or what we call shocker sets, holy shit, you can get incredible, not just adaptations in strength neurologically, but in the quality and support of joints, right? If you want to build up tendinal strength, unrack 50 pounds over your 1 rep max bench press and just hold it there. Right? Just hold it there and you're going to get increased bone density, increased connective tissue strength just by doing these holds. And you can You can hold in a locked out shortened position. You can hold in a lengthened position. You can hold in a mid-range position. They're all valuable. And what we'll do is we'll kind of mix this up where, let's say, Dave, we'll do push-ups, right? And we'll say, hey, you're going to do 1 push-up plus a 1 second hold halfway up. In the 2 push-ups plus a 2 second hold. I want you to try and see if you can do this. In the 3 plus a 3 second hold. And if you can make it to 10, you are a badass and you got to add a band. But like that's a really cool, we call it the push-up man test, but all kinds of cool stuff like that. We'll do stuff where, even with squat-based movements, and I know a lot of people will typically like go and pause at the bottom for a second. Pausing in the stretch position is a great way to do what we were talking about before, just get some loaded stretching. But furthermore, we'll do stuff where, let's say we bang out a couple reps and then we go to the bottom position and we just hold it there for 20 seconds. And we're holding a loaded stretch. And then we're going to pump out 20 half reps. And then we're going to get as many full reps as we can. And this is where you can really fuck someone up with a lightweight because they're sitting there thinking like, I got a 400-pound bench press. I have these 50-pound dumbbells aren't going to do anything for me. But honestly, it's where they feel weak like that, where they have the most opportunity to progress.
I'm going to let Mike jump in 1 second, but this is a topic that Jordan and I were talking about before we actually started recording. In the gymnastics world, isometrics are enormously valuable, and it's a lot of where we spend our time, right? Holding positions, trying to make them look beautiful. There's an aesthetic component to the gymnastics world, but a lot of our hold positions are done with skeletal structure component in place, meaning straight arm or straight limb work. And you mentioned it as part of your training there, but it seems like in the bodybuilding world, a lot more of the isometrics are done with a bent arm or a bent limb type of activation to get the muscle to be working more than maybe the connective tissue. Is it correct to think that both are valuable, that you need to be thinking more about connective tissue strength as well as belly of muscle strength in terms of isometric? Where do you fall in terms of value on both ends of that spectrum?
The benefit of holding in the lengthened position is opening up the fiber. And is getting time in the stretch. So if you're talking about range of motion or functional range of motion, holding that stretch and opening up those fibers allow a lot of the nutrients to get into the muscle cells. Oftentimes it'll trap a ton of blood inside the muscle. So that's really the benefit of the lengthened position. It's also going to be a weaker position because muscles are stronger when they're shortened. Holding in the lockout, I believe, has greater effect on the joint integrity, right? So you're talking about like the positional strength to be able to hold the lockout in the shoulder. I think that's where you see a lot of that. Or for instance, you get an athlete who's got an achy shoulder, right? Do some overhead carries with the bamboo bar. Like that's a great way to build that strength in the joint and the joint integrity. And I don't know that one is better than the other. I think they're just different, right? Actually this week we have a complex on our chest day where we're doing 3 reps of a bench press plus a 30-second hold into 3 reps of a bench press plus a 30-second hold, into 3 reps of a bench press plus a 30-second hold. That's 1 set. So it's 90 seconds of holding with like 50% of your bench press. But I mean, at the end, the athletes are like shaking like crazy. And you can see just when you start to see the oscillation in the muscle, whether that be with a dynamic movement or a static hold, it's where you see that muscle starting to fail. That's where the adaptation is going to come, right? And so the tricky part is, how do we do that safely?
Sure. Mike, do you want to jump in? I have an additional question there, but
I mean, I'll let you go. This is where I like program all of my squatting things from for everybody, and everybody hates me for it, but it's so much fun. But yeah,
I got to send you some of our leg days, Mike, because I
have a bone to pick. I do have one bone to pick with you, Dave. So
pick away.
During lockdown, I wanted something a little different and some inspiration. I was tired of trying to figure things out for myself. So I started to do a few of your workouts, and you had one session, and it was like an obnoxious amount of front squats at like 15 reps. And I've never been more angry at another human in my life, because as a weightlifter, I was like, all right, it's front squats. I like front squats. I was like, all right, 15 reps. I've definitely never done a 15 rep front squat in my life. This is probably going to suck, but like the amount of suck that it brought was so much more than anything I felt.
Crazy. It's phenomenal. And talk about a cardiorespiratory response. I'm like, forget about conditioning, but like leg days, honestly, when you think about just the whole body, right? When you do leg day, you are going to be using the most amount of muscle. It's going to be the most fatiguing. It's going to require the most recovery time. And if you're trying to get bigger, you better be doing exhaustive leg days that really shock your body into changing. And then you need to give yourself time to recover from that leg day. One of the guys who probably had the best legs in bodybuilding ever, his name is Tom Platz. He's an old
very familiar.
Insane. He would do legs every 2 weeks. And I got to sit next to him at the Arnold Classic, and we were trading back squat stories, because he loved to squat and I love to squat, and yada, yada. And he gave me a workout, and he's like, oh, your guys are going to love this. So it's a workout, and I believe it's 9 sets of back squat, 20, 18, 16, 14, 12, 10, 8, 8, 8. Right. And the whole thing is building up to heavy, heavy sets of 8. Mm-hmm. Now, that's one way you can get the adaptation, is the volume, right? So you think like, okay, it's a lot of volume. It's probably not going to be as heavy. The other way you can get it is by using tempo. The other way you can get it is by using load. So there are lots of different ways to kind of skin a cat. And I think a good leg day has some representation of all those, some heavy mechanical loading stuff, some concentration work, and then the metabolic stress stuff is phenomenal. And I think beyond that, like, you don't need to condition on a leg day for sure. Like, your heart rate's going to get jacked up to 180 beats on some of those sets. So it's not really necessary. And folks who are just used to doing 5x5 are thrown by that, right? Because they're like, well, this is kind of like a whole fucking thing.
Oh yeah. I mean, I remember, you'll probably enjoy this story. I mean, 10 rep squats were like a staple of my training later in my career, because they just had such a carryover. There was just so much good time under tension, and I was old enough and strong enough to move good weights with it. And I remember I was at a Barbells for Boobs fundraiser event with Matt Hathcock, and we wanted to do something fun. So we're like, oh, let's just do 315 back squat AMRAP. Like, let's just see how much we can do, and nobody can drop it. And he ended up getting, 25 or 26 reps. And then I ended up getting to 30 reps. And I never had been so sick feeling in my life. I think my heart rate, I probably had my max heart rate ever in my life, everything. But at the same time, there was a part of me that was very much, I knew I could do something with it because of what I'd done with 10 reps, and I knew what that felt like. And, 3 sets of 10, 10 sets of 10, 5 sets of 10, all these crazy things. The point of the story I guess I'm getting to is I'm always happy to demonstrate to the athletes I get to work with the effectiveness of like high volume, high intensity squatting. And then when you add tempo to that, like what that can do for your entire training stimulus and how much carryover it has to so many other things.
Exactly. And it's also kind of like a conjugate, almost like a CrossFit approach to this too, because it's like, yeah, we'll do that. But then the next week it might be 5x5, right? So you're kind of leveraging all these different things, and that creates versatility. And I think all the people that are experiencing overuse injuries from the same movements, the same reps, I mean, like, listen, bodybuilding, traditional bodybuilding, like I said, it's linear periodization. And you have these camps. You have the low rep people camp. You have the high rep people camp. This guy named Mike Menser was like, just do one set as hard as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Dorian Yates, like super high intensity. Arnold Schwarzenegger, lots of volume, 30 sets in a workout. It all works, right? But I think when you start mixing it up, now what you're doing is you're creating physical culture. You're creating an athlete that has the imposing physicality, but can also do a lot of different things pretty well. And I love that, because it's not about just being on stage as a bodybuilder, it's being able to use your fitness. And that concept of physical culture is something that's been lost in the past few decades, where, you know, the best looking guys used to be the strongest and the most athletic. And now I'm an Olympic lifter, I'm a power lifter, I'm a CrossFitter, I'm a bodybuilder. Like, everything is separated. And I think using all those tools together is how you're able to create that. And going back to what you're saying about the 10 rep squats, great program out there for you guys, been around forever. It's called Super Squats. I don't know if you guys ever heard of it. Super Squats, it's based around one set of 20 reps. So it's a 20 rep squat program where you start, there's some other movements in there, but the idea is you do this program 2 to 3 times a week. And the only rule is that the next subsequent workout, you have to do more weight on the 20 rep squat than you did the previous weight. So Cammie and I did this a couple of years ago. Now, this went along with like some asinine thinking, like the Go Mad diet, drink a gallon of milk a day and just get some baby wipes if you're lactose intolerant. You know, it's kind of like that Mark Rippetoe era Lon Kilgore squat or whatever. They're traditionalists, right? But you do a hard reps set of 20, and then you do some auxiliary bodybuilding movements, some RDLs, a little bit of bench press, and you just kind of repeat that 2 or 3 times a week. And it's phenomenal. If you've never done that before, it's phenomenal for putting on size. Cammie and I did that in a year when she was focused on building her strength. And we said, hey, let's try this 20 rep back squat and see how we do. And this was the year where she by far made the most progress in terms of her strength lifting barbells and Olympic lifting. But she started at 185 pounds. I started at 315. And by the end, I think it was only about 3 months later. And we did this about twice a week. 3 months later, she was up to, Cam, what were you up to? Like 225, 240? 245 pounds for 20. And I was up to 450 pounds for 20.
Oh my God.
And just holding the bar on your back for that long. You're talking about isometrics. Like, you know, there's so many ways to skin a cat. And the one common denominator in the 30,000 foot view of this is the body's a dynamic machine and it's just designed to survive. It's the general adaptation syndrome. You know, Hans Seal in 1909 said organisms that are exposed to stress tend to adapt to that stress. So, you know, as long as you are stressing yourself to the point where you do not like it, it is not comfortable, it's shaking, it's painful, the RPE is high, you feel like the weight's going to fall on your face, that's where the adaptation is going to happen.
I just have one last question here, Dave, and I know you got to get going. But we talked about it, we mentioned it, and you've talked about it a little bit, but I want to give our listeners just a little bit more clarity around it if they want to approach this. And it has to do with an athlete ownership component that I mentioned, but around DOMs, around being sore, around figuring out what's appropriate for an individual while doing this plan. You said the muscle breakdown is important for it to create an adaptation, for you to be able to feel like you're actually growing, but you don't want to be sore for an entire week. You want to do something that doesn't allow you to get hungry to get back after that muscle group. How do you find that as an athlete with the plan? Is it just continuing to tinker with things and trial and error to find, hey, you know, the numbers that Dave gave me within the plan aren't appropriate for my starting point. I'm going to tinker until it's appropriate and I'm getting the correct amount of soreness and recovery and recuperation depending on what my starting point is? There's no real hard and fast law or rule around that. It's athlete specific. Is that correct?
Well, I think number one, define the goal. You have to define the goal. If you have no defined goal, then you're just guessing as to what's working. You're like, oh, okay, everything's kind of better. And that's the thing is, like, you ask people how they eat and train, they go, oh, pretty good. But there's no defined goal. So I think the first thing is define what the goal is. If we're talking about physical adaptations, right? Is the goal to increase muscle mass? Is it to reduce body fat? Is it to be stronger? Is it to have more capacity for gymnastics? But define that goal. And then from there, specific adaptations to impose demands. You need to come up with a protocol or a roadmap to hit that goal that lines up with that goal. So if your goal is, hey, I want to be bigger and stronger, what are you doing? Well, I run 10Ks on Saturday and then I do CrossFit a couple days a week. That's not going to get you there, right? Same thing from the nutritional perspective. And I think this is, well, an area we haven't talked about, but probably way more important than what you're doing in the gym is what you're doing out of the gym, especially when it comes to physical adaptation. Your nutrition, your body's internal chemistry, the cellular energy status is going to dictate whether you're growing, whether you're getting stronger, whether you're reducing body fat. And I think a lot of people tend to chuck it into this black box bucket where they're like, I eat paleo and something happens and I'm hoping that it gets better. You need to have way more precision and accuracy. And nobody does that better than bodybuilders, where everything is calculated, the nutrient timing, the macronutrient balance, the food types. And one of the biggest mistakes I see people making is that they love to train hard and push themselves in the gym. Like, people will do pull-ups until their fucking hands bleed. They'll condition until they puke into a bucket. But the minute a nutrition program or plan gets a little bit hard, they're like, oh my God, I'm hungry. I'm stuffed. I can't eat anymore. Like, you need to get uncomfortable for your body to change. So the same way you got to put more weight on the bar, to get the back squat to continue to go up, or increase the capacity of the gymnastics by doing more reps or getting into harder positions. You need to challenge yourself from the nutritional perspective as well. And then the final piece of that is you need to become a master in understanding your body and your body's chemistry. You should understand your blood work. You should understand the stress you're putting on your body. And if you have those things dialed in, along with a recovery plan, and all of this is related to recovery. You don't grow when you're training. You grow when you're recovering. And the best recovery is going to happen when you're getting good, deep sleep. And having the right energy status and the right macronutrient balance is going to influence the chemistry as to, what your body's going to do. So you really need to take that to the next level. And that's where, when you talk about accountability, that's what accountability looks like. It's doing those things that, people talk about like mental toughness, and they think that doing hard things is mental toughness. It's not mental toughness if you're already comfortable doing something hard. To a CrossFitter, doing a hard CrossFit workout is not mental toughness. To a CrossFitter, maybe doing something that doing Zumba, right? Doing like spin class, maybe that's mental toughness or whatever. But you have to get into these things that maybe you've avoided or you've kind of thrown into that bucket where you're like, it's pretty good, because that's usually where you have the most opportunity. And I think, while CrossFit's done a great job of getting a great baseline for nutrition, eat meats, vegetables, nuts and seeds, some fruit, little starch, and no sugar. Try to eat in quantities that, support performance, but not body fat. That's a great starting point, but that's also extremely vague, right? And while that represents improvement from the status quo, if you're someone who's not trying to go from bad to good, but wants to go from good to great, that's where that extra level of precision and accuracy needs to come in.
That makes sense, man. I feel like we need a secondary episode just to talk about all the external stuff that's important here. It's not just in the gym stuff, but the external stuff is equally, if not more important. Mike, anything you got before we close out here with Dave?
Wait, I didn't hear it from Jordan. Jordan hasn't said anything all podcast here.
Jordan as the resident bodybuilder, he's just absorbing everything. He's waiting for 2.0, where we can just go into all
let Jordan jump in.
There's been a lot of restraint on my behalf. I'm generally the producer. I sit in the back and I take notes. But yeah, I used to be a bodybuilder, and a lot of the stuff you're talking about is so familiar, and I miss it all terribly because I don't do very much of it anymore. And you'll probably get an email from me after this with like a whole bunch of exciting things that I want to talk about. But yeah, I usually just sit in the background and take notes.
Well, listen, I think great coaches, they tend to steal a lot. And I would love to give you guys all like a subscription to Muscle Anarchy so you can see some of this stuff and try it out. And the only thing I ask is that if you put it out there, just say, hey, we got this awful thing from Dave.
I have something that I'd like to offer you to steal, actually, Dave. There was I used to love, like, you talk about the leg workouts that you guys do, and that was like the thing that we took the most pride in when I was competing in bodybuilding.
Usually
And-
there's like a leg room where if you're doing leg day, you're not even allowed in the same vicinity as the peasants training their arms. You need to be in a separate domain in the cave.
But one of the my favorite protocols that we used to do, which was like the beginning of the leg workout, and I'm going to increase the weight for you a little bit because you're much bigger than me. But we'd throw 225 on the bar. For you, I would say 275, maybe 315. And the goal is to do 100 reps in the fewest number of sets possible, not for time, not for anything like that, but just to do it in the fewest number of sets that you can. And it was always fucking brutal. And
I mean, that's a lot of metabolic stress.
Yeah.
And that's that stuff pairs up really well, honestly, for like, usually like maybe one of the last things you do, if you're looking at a set of 5 different sets of, building up in a back squat, and you hit your top set and then you drop the weight down, and then you say, okay, now 100 reps for time. And one thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about, not for time. Okay. For complete longest sets you can get. One thing that I didn't talk to you guys about, and this is kind of relevant to really anything you're talking about in terms of capacity, is this element of like pre-fatigue, right? Because everyone is so into trying to be as fresh as they possibly can when they lift a heavy weight. But if the goal is exhaustion of the muscle, you'll be able to reach exhaustion a lot easier and typically a lot safer if you pre-exhaust the muscle, because now 300 pounds feels like 400 pounds, right? And it's the same amount of stress on the muscle in terms of the demand. You're still, taking it to failure, but it's a way to kind of circumvent maybe people limited by loading just by making them tired before they touch that heavy weight.
I like that. I think we should start incorporating that into some bodyweight stuff too. I really like that. We'll come back with some stuff that we played around with, and we'll all tag you in the workouts, Dave. See if you can tackle them yourself.
I'll send you guys some leg days. I think you'll like it. You gotta send me some videos, you guys, when you're done.
I think we've got some like Thunder Monkey Power Bro collaboration workouts ready to come out.
Oh yeah.
Like I said, one of my favorite things is like, getting to talking about it is great, right? But it's like I would let off with here. I'm like, nothing beats letting people feel it, because we're all used to these movements. We've all done this really cool functional fitness stuff, and I think we're pretty familiar with how we think it's supposed to feel. But the first time you get to the point where you're like, what the fuck is going on? Like, I've never been shaken like this before. That is so fun and such an eye-opener. And for a lot of people who have maybe hit that plateau, it opens up a new door where they're like, especially as you get older, you get a little afraid of intensity because you don't want to hurt yourself, right? And you think about it on this very myopic spectrum. It opens the door to this whole new avenue of stuff, and really maybe, like I said, it can take that shift away from the whiteboard and put it just back on the training effect and the physical adaptation as the definition of success in a training session. And then just feeling successful changes the game for people, like mentally feeling like you're getting somewhere, feeling like you're making progress. It does a 180, and the way you think, that's going to affect your physiology too. There's a placebo effect for sure when it comes to training. And if you believe it's working and you feel good about what you're doing, you're going to get a better result.
Without a doubt. Mike talks about that all the time. if you believe in the plan, even if it's a shitty plan, you believe in it, it's going to have success around it. Before we get you out of here, Dave, a couple of quick questions for you. First one, what sport or discipline do you prefer, weightlifting or gymnastics?
Gymnastics. Definitely.
Really?
Gymnastics. Yeah.
Shame on you. Shame
I
on
know.
you.
Because weightlifting hurt his back. So he always
when I pre-back injury, I would probably say weightlifting. Post-back injury, I'm like, I'll do the gymnastics. Actually, I really like calisthenics. Granted, I stay away from some of the higher skill stuff because of shoulder injury stuff that I have. But I mean, like, push-ups are a staple of our chest day. Banded, weighted push-ups, barbell push-ups, like dips, banded dips, weighted dips, dips to failure, hypertrophy drop set, like all that stuff. I really like that. And what's nice about that is it also is a separator for people, because people might be like, well, you're a big bodybuilder and you can move all this weight just because you're big. So when you start to introduce that strength to body weight ratio component, now you have that component of athleticism in there. That's why I really like it.
Love it. I'll take it. Another notch in the gymnastics belt. any guests that you think would be great for us to have on the podcast? Somebody you've come across recently, somebody that you know that might be a good interview.
Jason Brown. Jason Brown has something called conjugate conditioning. He's got a really nice program on Train Heroic, and I just love his take on training. What he does is he kind of overlaps what you guys may be familiar with, the West Side conjugate system on top of really a GPP program, and he's able to come up with I think a lot more user-friendly versions of constantly varied high-intensity training. So I'm a big fan of him. He uses like lots of sleds and kettlebells. He does a lot of hypertrophy work along with it, but he also, and his, I think he was probably, he either mentored or was an intern at Westside. I'm sure that's where he picked up a lot of this stuff, but it's nice to see that same kind of, okay, you love functional fitness. You've been doing it for a while, but what now? Because what you're doing is no longer really working. And I think that's the big question is like, how do I continue to train hard as I get older? And how do I continue to see results when what I had been doing before is no longer producing them?
Awesome. Jordan will take that name down and hopefully we can get him lined up for a podcast in the near future. Last question. If you're a book reader, any book that you'd recommend to the audience you've read recently, if not TV show or movie that you've seen recently that's worth watching?
Definitely Ryan Holiday, Discipline is Destiny. I think that's honestly like the biggest lessons I've learned, especially in the past few years, is that it all boils down to discipline. If you're focused in discipline, you're going to be successful. And I think that's something, especially now in this time of instant gratification and Instagram and TikTok and easy pills, like it really is living a highly disciplined life is going to make people a lot happier and a lot more fulfilled and make them better contributors to the world. So check out that book. It's an awesome book. He has great stories about all different expressions of this and contrast between people who were highly disciplined and people who did the same thing that weren't and how those outcomes were different. So you should check it out.
Love it. Love it. So Dave, really appreciate the time. And we want to make sure that people can follow you, what you got going on. Can you tell people where they can find out more about your programs and everything else you got going on with with Thunderbro and also with Muscle Anarchy and things like that?
Yeah. So you can find us at thunderbro.com, and it's THUNDRBRO, like Thun Dr. Bro. It's where bro science meets real science. And if you guys out there are listening and you want to give, let's say, Muscle Anarchy a shot, there is a 7-day free trial. So you can go and see a week of programming and try it out. It's really cool. We have programs that are, like I said, different splits. We have an express program, all different ways you can kind of blend it with functional fitness. I'm at davefreakinlipson on Instagram. So if you guys have any questions on hypertrophy training or nutrition or longevity, regenerative medicine, any of that stuff, hit me up. I love talking to that. And if I don't know the answer, I'll definitely be able to point you in the right direction. And you can follow us at Thunderbro, just on our Instagram. And then beyond that, we're trying to get out there and do some of these hypertrophy for functional fitness workshops where, we'll come to your gym, talk about hypertrophy training and nutrition, put you through some workouts, calculate some macros. And that's really fun for us just to get out in the community and be back in the CrossFit affiliate space, because we used to be so involved in CrossFit, teaching seminars every weekend. And now, we're kind of adjacent to it. So we love being part of that community and going to events and doing fun stuff like that.
Fantastic, man. Well, I really appreciate the time today. It was great to catch up and see you and hear what you got going on. Hopefully we can see you in person sometime soon. Like we said, the invitation is open to come to a camp sometime in 2024. If you guys can fit into your schedules, we'd love to have you.
I'd love to. Cami, I know she's excited to kind of also get back out there a little bit and be back in that CrossFit space. And she's got her own company called Alpha Babe. And she does what I do with chicks. She blends for hypertrophy, performance, and aesthetics together, a little bit more geared towards the ladies. But, she loves that stuff. And thank you guys so much for having me on. It's an honor to be here. And oh boy, I had a blast. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate the time today, man.
Hell yeah. Thanks, guys.
Everyone else out there, please be sure to head over to powermonkeyfitness.com for services and upcoming events. Check out our Instagram pages for regular teaching and technical content at Power Monkey Fitness, at Dave Durante, and at Mike Service. On behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we're your hosts. I'm Dave Durante with my co-host Mike Service. And until next time, thank you all for listening.